My name is Alex, and after years of working as a security guard, I've experienced things that are simply beyond explanation. I've always had a fascination with horror stories, but living one is an entirely different matter. There's a cold, creeping sensation when you feel your reality being twisted by something you can't control or understand. What I'm about to tell you is no campfire story. It's one of the most terrifying nights of my life. It was a night like any other, quiet and routine. My best friend and I were working together on the night shift, as we often did. We had developed a habit of staying in touch through earpieces as we made our rounds, chatting to pass the time and sharing stories to break the monotony. The facility we were guarding was a complex, with several buildings clustered together, mostly educational facilities, including a school with 5 large buildings. Each shift required us to ensure everything was secure by checking the perimeters and activating the alarm systems in specific locations. I was responsible for the first and last rounds of the night, while my friend would handle the second round, allowing both of us to cover the entire campus. Over the years, the routine had become second nature. But that night, something felt off. Not in any obvious way, just a gnawing sense that hung in the back of my mind as I began my first round. It was after midnight, the dead of night when the world is at its stillest. I was making my usual circuit, heading toward the rear of the 3rd building in the complex. This part of the campus always gave me the creeps. It was mostly deserted, poorly lit, and surrounded by wide-open sports fields. The air had an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or distant sounds from the city. When I reached the back of the building, I instinctively scanned my surroundings. Then I looked up, and that's when I saw it. The top floor of the building was pitch black, save for one illuminated room on the very top floor. It was the only light shining out from any of the 5 buildings. What really froze my blood, though, were the figures standing inside that room. Mannequins, 3 or 4 of them, I couldn't tell exactly, standing perfectly still, all facing the window, as if they were staring right at me. For a few seconds, I was paralyzed with shock. These weren't the usual mannequins you'd see in a store window. No, these were training mannequins for the beauty and fashion programs held at the school, wooden, featureless, and with an odd lifelessness to them. They should have been locked away inside the classrooms, not arranged in the only lit room, peering out into the dark. A cold chill shot down my spine. I quickly snapped a photo of the eerie scene and sent it to my friend, trying to shake the uneasy feeling building in my chest. "You're not gonna believe this," I muttered into my earpiece, my voice betraying my unease. Moments later, his laughter came through, casual and unbothered. He was brushing it off, telling me I had to go inside and turn off the light, protocol, of course. And he was right, though the idea of entering that building now filled me with dread. Despite the fear gnawing at me, I knew I had no choice. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and headed inside. The building was eerily silent, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the empty hallways as I made my way up. I hated elevators, so I took the stairs, climbing swiftly, my heart pounding louder with every step. By the time I reached the 4th floor, my palms were slick with sweat. There was something about this floor that felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. The hallway was dimly lit, with only emergency lights casting long, flickering shadows. As I approached the door to the room I had seen from outside, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The small, rectangular window near the door was dark now. I hesitated for a moment before swinging the door open and reaching around the corner for the light switch. Click. The light blinked off, plunging the room into darkness. But something stopped me from moving right away, an instinct, maybe, or just sheer nerves. I stepped into the doorway, and my eyes adjusted to the dimness. I froze. The mannequins were gone. The room was completely empty. My mind raced. Was I in the wrong room? Did I imagine it? I quickly double-checked the layout in my head. No, this was the only room with the light on. The only one with that eerie group of mannequins. And yet, here I stood, staring at an empty classroom. I fumbled for my phone and pulled up the photo I had taken just minutes earlier, my fingers trembling slightly. I stared at the image. There they were. Mannequins, clearly visible through the window, standing in the room I was now standing in. How could they just disappear? My heart pounded harder as I whispered into the earpiece, "They're gone. The mannequins, they're not here anymore." "What?" My friend's voice crackled through the speaker. "Just get out of there." I didn't need to be told twice. I switched off the last of the lights, hurried down the stairs, and exited the building as fast as I could. As I stepped back into the cold night air, I activated the alarm system for that building, ensuring everything was secure before concluding my first round. I tried to shake off the unease, but the image of those mannequins staring down at me from the window refused to leave my mind. But little did I know, that night was only just beginning. The strange occurrences had only started, and whatever was happening in that building was far from over. After I finished my first round, I tried to push the eerie image of those mannequins out of my mind, but it lingered like a shadow in the back of my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, very wrong. Still, I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just some students playing a prank or moving things around without telling anyone. That seemed logical. At least, I hoped it was. As I made my way back to the security office, I radioed my friend and told him about what I had seen. There was a long pause on his end. His usual easygoing demeanor seemed to shift, as though he wasn't sure how to react. "That's weird," he said slowly. "But hey, don't overthink it. I'll be heading over there for my round soon. I'll check it out and let you know if I see anything strange." I wasn't fully reassured, but there was nothing more I could do. I logged my first round, checked the time, and waited for his update. Hours passed in relative silence, the unease never quite leaving me. I tried to distract myself with routine paperwork and the occasional radio chatter, but my thoughts kept returning to that lit-up room and the mannequin standing there, staring out into the darkness. Then, around 2 in the morning, I heard my friend's voice crackle through the earpiece again. This time, there was something different in his tone, something I hadn't heard from him before. "Hey, Alex. You said the mannequins were in the 3rd building, right?" His voice wasn't casual. It was tight, strained, like he was trying to figure something out, but couldn't quite wrap his head around it. Confused, I replied, "Yeah, the 3rd building. Top floor, last room on the right." "Why? Did you see them?" There was a brief pause before he said, "Check your WhatsApp." I could hear the unease in his voice, and immediately my stomach dropped. With trembling hands, I opened the message he had just sent me. It was another photo, taken from the same angle as the one I had sent him earlier. But this time, something was different. My blood ran cold. The mannequins were no longer on the top floor. They were on the 3rd floor now, standing in a different room, but arranged exactly the same way, facing the window, as if watching us. The same eerie light illuminated the room, casting long, distorted shadows behind them. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. How was this possible? Mannequins don't just move. Someone had to be behind this. But who? And why? "They're a floor lower now," my friend said, his voice shaky, breaking through my thoughts. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. But I swear, they weren't there during my first pass earlier tonight. What the hell is going on, man? My heart was racing, my mind reeling with questions I couldn't answer. "We need to check this out together," I finally said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Something's not right. I'll meet you in 10. We quickly decided to do the 3rd and final round together. Neither of us wanted to return to that building alone. The fact that the mannequins had moved, seemingly on their own, was enough to convince us that this wasn't just a prank. Something else was happening here, something we couldn't explain. When I arrived at the meeting point, my friend was already there, sitting in his car, looking pale and tense. Without a word, I got into the driver's seat of my own car, and we drove slowly toward the building. The campus was eerily quiet, and the dark, open sports fields around us only heightened the sense of isolation. As we approached the 3rd building, we both tensed up. My friend pointed out the window toward the same room where he had seen the mannequins during his 2nd round. The light was still on, and sure enough, the mannequins were there again, standing motionless, just as they had been in the photo. We sat in the car for a moment, staring up at the figures. It felt like time had slowed down, like we were watching something that wasn't supposed to exist in our reality. "Do you think someone's moving them?" my friend asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, though deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. After a few moments of tense silence, we made the decision to call the central alarm office. They could check the system and see if anyone had accessed the building or tampered with the alarms. We dialed in, hoping for some clarity. The dispatcher on the other end checked the logs and confirmed that no one had been inside the building since I had turned off the lights during my first round. There was no record of anyone entering or leaving since then. That meant the only people who could have moved those mannequins were us. And we hadn't touched them. The tension in the car thickened as we sat in stunned silence. The dispatcher asked if everything was all right, and we quickly made up an excuse about checking a faulty light and promised to reset the alarm system soon. But now, we were left with more questions than answers. We had to go inside. There was no turning back now. We needed to know what was going on, even if the thought of entering that building again filled me with dread. We parked the car close to the entrance, and with flashlights in hand, we stepped into the cold night air. The sense of unease was palpable as we approached the door. Every creak, every shadow seemed menacing. The wind rustled through the trees, but to us, it sounded like distant whispers, as if the campus itself was warning us not to proceed. But we ignored it. We had to. When we finally unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air felt colder than it should have, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for us. The long hallways stretched ahead of us, dark and silent, except for the faint hum of the emergency lights. We moved quickly, making our way up to the third floor. The door to the room with the mannequins was just ahead, its small window offering a glimpse of the illuminated room inside. My heart pounded as I approached, and with one last look at my friend, I reached for the door handle. What we found inside was just the beginning of the nightmare that was about to unfold. By the time the third round rolled around, the weight of the night's strange events had settled heavily between my friend and me. We had both convinced ourselves that someone must be playing a prank, though deep down, neither of us truly believed it. There was something too unnatural about the way the mannequins had moved, and the eerie stillness of the campus only amplified the gnawing fear in the back of our minds. We decided to check out the buildings together. We figured that whatever, or whoever, was responsible for moving the mannequins would reveal themselves if we confronted them directly. Strength in numbers, right? As we got into my car, I noticed the usual lightness between us had vanished. There were no jokes, no casual conversation. Just a shared silence as we drove slowly around the perimeter of the complex, the headlights casting long, distorted shadows on the walls of the buildings. The buildings loomed like dark sentinels in the night, their windows black and empty. All except for one. As we rounded the corner toward the third building, we saw it again, the same dimly lit room, this time on a lower floor. The mannequins stood there, motionless as before, their featureless heads tilted slightly as if they were staring right at us. We stopped the car, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene, something that didn't feel like a prank anymore. The coldness that hung in the air seemed almost alive, wrapping itself around us as we sat there, staring up at those mannequins. "I don't like this, man," my friend finally muttered, breaking the silence. "This feels wrong." I nodded, my throat dry. "Let's check it out. We'll figure out what's going on." But the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. We parked near the entrance and sat in the car for another moment, gathering our nerves. The plan was simple: get in, map out where the mannequins were, and check to see if there was any evidence of someone tampering with the building. It should have been easy. But nothing about that night felt easy. Before we entered, we called the central alarm system again, asking them to confirm if anyone else had interacted with the alarms or the lighting systems. The response came back as expected. The last person to touch the system was me, during my first round. That was hours ago. No one else had entered the building since. That left us with one conclusion: if the mannequins had moved, they had done so on their own. Or something else had moved them. We exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. Whatever was happening here was beyond a simple prank. We had to know the truth, but neither of us felt ready for what we might find. With flashlights in hand, we unlocked the door to the third building and stepped inside. The hallway stretched out before us, dark and silent except for the faint hum of the emergency lights that flickered intermittently. Every sound echoed unnaturally, our footsteps, the creak of the door, the rustle of our jackets. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to make the first move. We moved cautiously, the beams of our flashlights sweeping across the walls and floor, illuminating the path ahead. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been for an indoor space, and a strange, metallic smell hung faintly in the air. As we ascended the stairs, my heart pounded louder with each step. The third floor was our target, where the mannequins now stood in the illuminated room. We reached the landing, and there it was, room 302. The small window in the door allowed a narrow view inside, but what we saw stopped us in our tracks. The mannequins were still there, arranged exactly as we had seen them from outside. But now that we were closer, there was something even more unsettling. Their positions seemed slightly different, as though they had shifted ever so subtly in the time it had taken us to climb the stairs. Their featureless faces appeared angled toward the door, as though they knew we were coming. We hesitated, standing in the hallway just outside the door, the tension between us thick. Finally, I took a deep breath and reached for the handle, my fingers cold and trembling. The door creaked open, and we stepped inside. The room was bathed in that same dim, unnatural light. The mannequins stood there, eerily still, their wooden bodies casting distorted shadows on the walls. We counted them, 4 in total, standing in the center of the room, their blank faces turned toward us. At first, we said nothing, too unnerved to break the silence. My friend began mapping the room, marking the exact locations of each mannequin. We wanted to have a clear record, to ensure that if they moved again, we could be absolutely certain. But as we moved closer to them, the air in the room seemed to shift, becoming heavier, more oppressive. That's when we heard it. A faint sound, barely audible, like the distant scraping of wood against the floor. My heart leaped into my throat, and we both froze, our flashlights darting across the room. But nothing had changed. The mannequins stood in their original positions, unmoving. "Did you hear that?" my friend whispered, his voice barely above a breath. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yeah, I did." We exchanged a glance, our nerves fraying, but we pressed on. We checked each corner of the room, looking for any signs that someone had been tampering with the mannequins. But there were no footprints, no disturbances in the dust on the floor. It was as if the room hadn't been touched in years. The unease settled deeper into my bones. There was something wrong with this place, something we couldn't see, but we could feel. Just as we were about to leave, my friend froze. "Alex, look." He pointed toward one of the mannequins, his face pale. I turned to where he was pointing and felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. The mannequin closest to the door, the one we had entered past, was no longer facing forward. It was turned slightly, just enough that its head was angled toward us, as if it had moved to watch us leave. My blood ran cold. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely steady. Without another word, we backed out of the room, our flashlights never leaving the mannequins. I shut the door behind us, and we hurried down the stairs, our hearts racing. The building felt more alive now, more malevolent, as if it was aware of us. We had overstayed our welcome. When we finally stepped back outside, the cold night air felt like a relief, though the sense of dread still clung to us. We activated the alarm system for the building and secured it. But as we drove away, neither of us could shake the feeling that we had just narrowly escaped something far more sinister than we had ever imagined.